This is a video for my JavaScript unit final for the front-end Promineo bootcamp. For this task, we were given a couple of instructions. We were supposed to create a card game called War. We were supposed to deal 26 cards to each player from a deck of 52. We were supposed to iterate through the turns where each player gets a card and plays a card. We were supposed to award a point to the player who had a card with a higher value. If there's a tie, we don't award any points to either player. And at the end of it all, we were supposed to display the score and declare the winner. And for this project, I took an object-oriented approach. I started with a couple classes. First, I made a card class that has a rank and a suite to represent the symbol and obviously the number. I also made a method for it called compare to, where if it's called, it compares the current instance of the class, so the current card object to the argument of a card object. And if the current instance has a greater rank than the argument, then it returns true. If it doesn't, then it returns false. I then made a class called deck, and it holds an array of cards and has a couple of methods in it that we can use. The first one is create full. I made it to just make a full stack of 52 cards. And then I created a method called shuffle, which randomizes the order of the cards in the array. And then I made a method called split, which takes in two player objects as arguments, and it assigns half of the current deck to each of them. Uh, then I made a class called player, and the player has a deck, and it also has a score. It has an empty deck at first, so that it can get assigned one with the split. Um, and then after that, I just started making the code for the game. So I got everything started with making a new deck. I created a full 52 cards. I shuffled them, and then I made two players because you need two of them to play the game. And then I used the split method from the deck object to assign half of it to each player. After that, I created some variables to use as shortcuts to access each player's cards, essentially. And then I started the game. So it has a counter to keep track of the amount of turns, and then it has a couple of conditionals. So uh, each while either player has a card in its deck still, the game will continue. This first condition right here, it's checking P1's deck of cards, and it's checking the last uh, card in it, and it compares it to the last card in player two's deck of cards. And it's saying if the first one is greater than the second player's card, then it logs the card for the first player, it logs the card for the second player, and then it says it awards a point to the first player. And it does the same for the player two. If the second player's card is greater than the first player's card, then it logs the cards and awards a point to the player two. And this last conditional is if there's a tie. If there's a tie, then it logs both cards, but it says a tie and no points are awarded. And then it moves on and it removes that card from each player's deck so that we could play the next one. And it increments the turn counter. After all of that has run, after the while loop is finished, it comes to this last conditional where you check the final score for each player. If player 1 has a greater score, then it logs that the player 1 wins after logging the scores. If player 2 has a higher score, it logs the scores, and it says player 2 wins. If there's a tie, it says we're all winners. And I'm going to open up in the browser real quick just to show you that it does work. Here you go. And you can see it starts at turn 1 and it comes all the way to the end, turn 26. And then it says player 2 wins in this instance. And if we reload, we get it again. And 13 and 12, player 1 wins. Let's do it a couple more times. 19 and 6, player 1 wins. Oh, wow, an instance of a tie where both win. And there you go. That's my project.